Maybe we can bring you in
Maybe
this.
once.
What do you like to do?
No, you can't afford me, Rick.
And we're not doing this for the sake of because we enjoy doing it. We're doing it because it's part of the art. And we're being excluded from the art.
Don Cornelius banned Rick James from Soul Train after this moment. But the real war was just beginning. Well, I've been wrong before, brother. I know I said you would never be nothing. But now I got to eat my way. I said the same thing about you, and that was true. They thought Rick was just another wild artist they could embarrass on television. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Rick, you're so hot. Oh, yes, I am. Could one of you girls blow on my face or something? You are. Cool me off. So hot. This wasn't Rick's first war. He'd already escaped the Navy, dodged the Manson murders, and built an empire that saved Modone. Don Cornelius was about to learn why you don't mess with the king of punk funk. So, let's get into Don Cornelius and Rick James beef it. It all started with attention. You could cut with a knife every time these two were in the same room. Their beef was loud, messy, and impossible to ignore. You could see it in their interviews. Don always gave off an air of barely contained frustration whenever Rick was in the building. It's for the sake of because we enjoy doing it. We're doing it because it's part of the art, and we're being excluded from the art. The first time Rick James hit the Soul Train stage, the crowd was hyped, but nobody was ready for what came next. Right out the gate, Don Cornelius came with the shade, low-key questioning Rick's wild style and over-the-top personality. It was tense. Don's cool, laid-back vibe clashing with Rick's loud, in-your-face energy. But Rick wasn't the type to just sit there and take it. He clapped back with that signature whiz, cracking up the audience while catching Don a little off guard. I'm happy for you. Couldn't happen to a better person. Hey, well, that's what I said last time I was on your show, and you disagree with me. Well, I've been wrong before, brother. I know I said you would never be nothing, but at first it just seemed like harmless back and forth. Rick James was always losing confidence. Some might even call it arrogance. And Don Cornelius had a way of throwing slick little jabs when the mood struck. Fans just figured it was two big personalities putting on a show. And for a while, that's exactly how it played out. Rick would roll in, bring the funk, and trade playful shots with Don. But behind the scenes, things weren't nearly as cool as they looked on camera. It's as successful for you. So save your money because you'll be seeing us on the motion pictures. In one of their most talked about interviews, Don straight up called out Rick's reputation for being, let's just say, a little wild. Rick, clearly not having it, hit back with a sly grin. Unpredictable gets people talking, Don. Isn't that why you invited me here? The tension was thick, but Rick being Rick brushed it off like a pro. Still, folks behind the scenes started noticing. What used to be playful jabs were starting to feel a little too personal. The moment everything really shifted, a lot of people point to that one interview where Rick straight up trashed Soul Train. He called the show stuck in the past and said it needed to get with the times by embracing newer, edgier acts like Well himself. Of course, word got back to Don, and let's just say he wasn't amused. Insiders claimed Don took it as a sign of disrespect and quietly started phasing Rick out of future episodes. And let's be real, Rick James was always a little too wild for TV. Back in the late 70s, Modone was struggling to stay relevant. And Rick came through with that raw, funky energy that kept the label alive well into the mid-80s. But Rick James knew he was a star. Rick James' journey didn't start with fame and fortune. It started with chaos, rebellion, and an ego bigger than Buffalo, New York, where he grew up. We were 11 months apart, so we did everything together. My mother dressed us alike. Long before he became the self-proclaimed king of punk funk, James Ambrose Johnson Jr. carried himself like he was destined for greatness. He wasn't just another kid in Buffalo. He was a kid already walking, talking, and acting like a star before anyone even knew his name. Most kids push boundaries as they grow up, sneaking out, skipping school, or testing authority. But James, he took it to another level. He wasn't just getting in trouble. He was living like he had nothing to lose. His mother, Mabel, was a professional dancer for Katherine Dunham, but she also worked as a numbers runner to support the family. This meant young James was exposed to both the glitz of show business and the danger side of the streets at an early age. While he got to witness jazz legends like John Coltrane, Ada James, and Miles Davis up close, he also saw crime, hustlers, and the harsh realities of survival. That wasn't the only thing he experienced too soon. In his autobiography, Glow, Rick claimed he lost his V-card at just 9 or 10 years old to a 14-year-old girl in his neighborhood. He later said, "My kinky nature came in early." S became a major theme in his music and personal life, shaping his persona as the self-proclaimed king of punk funk. By his teenage years, he was already restless, convinced Buffalo was too small for him. He wasn't just a fan of music. He believed he was meant to be in it. He was skipping school, running wild, and finding every opportunity to surround himself with the right people. While most kids were still figuring out what they wanted to do, James carried himself like he was already a legend in the making, and he had no patience for authority. He didn't want to follow rules, take orders, or fit into anyone's expectations. That rebellious streak would follow him for the rest of his life. But even as a young man, it was clear he wasn't wired to play it safe. He wanted more, and he was willing to break the rules to get it. Rick James wasn't just dreaming of success. He expected it. Even before he had a record deal, a hit song, or a famous name, he acted like the world would eventually bow at his feet. In his mind, it was only a matter of time. But before Rick from the Navy to music stardom James became a household name, he had a complicated journey. One that included a stint in the military, a rock band with Neil Young, and a drug addiction that would haunt him for the rest of his life. At just 15 years old, Rick knew he wanted nothing to do with the Vietnam War. So, like many young men at the time, he found a way around it. He lied about his age and joined the Naval Reserve, thinking it would keep him from getting drafted. But military life wasn't for him. He hated the strict rules, the discipline, and being told what to do. Instead of following orders, he spent his time playing drums with jazz bands, experimenting with drugs, and living life on his own terms. Growing up, Rick always had an interest in music. He was always banging on glasses with spoons and stuff. He couldn't stop moving. He was always trying to express what was inside it. By 1964, the Navy had enough of his rebellious ways. They placed him on active duty, but Rick wasn't about to stick around. In typical Rick James fashion, he told the draft board to kiss his ashy black ass and took off to Toronto, Canada. That one decision changed everything for him. Toronto in the mid-1960s was a hotbed for emerging musicians, and Rick found himself surrounded by future legends. He crossed paths with artists like Joni Mitchell and Neil Young, and before long, they formed a rock band called the Menina Birds. They were so good that Motown Records took notice and offered them a record deal. During this time, Rick met Stevie Wonder, who was impressed by his musical talent and asked for his name. Since Rick was technically on the run from the U.S. military, he panicked and blurted out a fake one, Ricky James Matthews. Stevie thought it was too long and suggested he shorten it. Just like that, Rick James was born. Well, Rick's stay in Canada was the real beginning of his career. Just when it seemed like Rick was on the verge of success, his past came back to haunt him. Since he had technically gone AWOL from the Navy, the military finally caught up with him. They tracked him down, arrested him, and threw him in a military prison. For most people, that would have been a wake-up call, a reason to slow down and stay out of trouble. But Rick James wasn't most people. If anything, the experience only fueled his determination. When he got out, he had one goal, to take over the music world. And that's exactly what he did. Rick James didn't just make it. He became a legend. His funk anthems still dominate dance floors, proving his influence never faded. But let's be real, his music wasn't the only thing that made him unforgettable. His wild lifestyle was just as famous. Thanks to Chappelle's show, a whole new generation got to witness the insane story surrounding Rick's life with the infamous, "I'm Rick James be becoming a cultural catchphrase. Darkness. One of the craziest Rick James stories involved two unlikely names, Mike Tyson and Alfonso Rivero. Yes, Carlton from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. According to Tyson's memoir, Rick strolled into a hotel one night, greeted Tyson like an old friend, then turned to Rivero and said, "Aren't you an actor?" Before Barrow could answer, Rick punched him in the face and took his beer. Even Tyson, one of the toughest men on the planet, was left speechless. But Rick's journey wasn't just about partying and music. He had some dark times, too. When he first joined the Navy, he was just 14 or 15 years old, already getting into trouble with drugs and stealing. He thought the military would straighten him out, but instead, he ended up being sent to Vietnam. What he saw there shook him to his core. The destruction, the violence, it was too much. That's when he decided to escape to Canada. His early days in Toronto weren't easy. He got jumped and beaten badly not long after arriving. Luckily, 3 men, including Leo Von Helm, came to his rescue, helped him up, and took him to a concert. That night changed everything for Rick. Seeing musicians perform made him realize he wanted to dedicate his life to music. After Canada, Rick made his way to Los Angeles, right into the heart of the counterculture movement. He started hanging out with rock legends, experimenting with different sounds, and even got his first acid trip from Jim Morrison himself. He was rubbing shoulders with the biggest names in music, but his journey to superstardom was just beginning. When it came to making music, Rick James wasn't about playing it safe. He was bold, unpredictable, and loved collaborating with the best in the game. And while working with icons always comes a little drama, one thing was for sure. Rick James was here to leave a mark. Stevie Wonder was a huge inspiration for Rick. But he wasn't just someone Rick looked up to. He actually gave him advice that stuck. Stevie told him, "Forget the rules. Make your own." And that's exactly what Rick did. He created a sound that was different from anything else out there. Layered, funky, and futuristic. Those unique beats and wild grooves. You can thank Stevie for pushing him to think outside the box. And let's not forget Tina Marie. She wasn't just another duet partner. She was his creative soulmate. Rick found her at Madone, saw her potential, and the rest is history. Their duet, Fire and Desire, absolute legend status. Behind the scenes, they pushed each other hard. Rick challenged her to go bigger and bolder, while Tina fired back with ideas that kept him on his toes. That spark between them, it showed every time they shared a stage or dropped a track together. Pure magic. Finally, today, pop singer Rick James is being accused of all kinds of terrible things, and authorities are taking it very seriously. But while Rick was making the allegations music history, there were also dark moments in his past that couldn't be ignored. In 2020, a woman came forward with serious accusations against him, claiming he had assaulted her back in 1979 when she was just 15 years old. She filed a $50 million lawsuit saying the attack happened while she was living in a group home. According to her, Rick was familiar with the people running the home and visited one night when the girls were finishing dinner. While the other girls were excited to see him, she says she didn't know who he was and left to go to her room. But moments later, she says Rick followed her, pinned her down, and assaulted her. She claimed he threatened her, telling her to stay quiet or he'd hurt her. The woman says the trauma haunted her for years. She struggled with alcohol and drugs, battled low self-esteem, and even had thoughts of suicide. She also suffered from panic attacks, nightmares, and flashbacks. In her lawsuit, she said, "This traumatic experience has caused me everlasting damage, and I would like to preserve my privacy in this matter." And I'm talking about albums that sold millions of copies. Every album we did, we never failed to have an ounce or two sitting right there on the console. Really, a big bag of quails. Okay, Crystal All Champagne and Jack Black Bourbon, and all at our beck and command right there. Rick James' early the band years days in Los Angeles were just as chaotic as the rest of his life. On one of his first nights in the city, he was crashing on musician Stephen Still's couch when he woke up to a shocking sight. A man sitting on the floor, bleeding from his wrists. Panicked, Rick ran to get help. It wasn't until later that he realized the man was Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors. Their paths crossed again when the Doors opened for Buffalo Springfield. And during one of their encounters, Morrison tricked Rick into trying acid for the first time. That moment would be the start of Rick's long and complicated relationship with drugs. While in California, Rick was working closely with bassist Greg Reeves. He introduced Greg to Neil Young, but it was Greg, not Rick, who ended up joining Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. That loss didn't slow Rick down. Instead, he pushed forward, forming his own rock band, Salt and Pepper. One of the most chilling moments of Rick's life came in 1969. His hairstylist friend Jay Sebring invited him to a party at actress Sharon Tate's house. Hungover and exhausted, Rick decided to skip it. The next morning, he woke up to the horrifying news that Jay and everyone at the party had been brutally murdered by the Manson family. That close call stuck with him for years. By 1970, Rick was still chasing his music dreams, working with a band called Heaven and Earth, which later became Great White Cane. In 1972, they released an album, but Rick was always looking for something bigger. He formed another band, Hot Lips, and even collaborated with Toronto blues band McKenna, Mendelssohn Mainline. During this time, he co-wrote a song called You Make the Magic, which was later recorded by the Chambers Brothers. By 1973, it was going solo clear that Rick was meant to be a solo artist. He signed with NM Records and released a song called My Mama, which became a hit in European clubs. After bouncing around different projects, he eventually returned to Buffalo and formed the Stone City Band. In 1977, Rick and his band landed a deal with Motown, the same label that had once signed him years before. This time, he was ready to take over. In April 1978, Rick released his debut solo album, Come Get It, introducing the world to his signature mix of funk, rock, and R&B. The album featured the hit song You and I, which shot to #1 on the R&B charts, along with the fan favorite Mary Jane. It sold over 1 million copies, making Rick an overnight star and giving Motown a much-needed boost at a time when the label was struggling. I sing, and when I'm feeling low, she comes as no surprise. With his signature braids, flashy outfits, and high-energy performances, Rick James was on his way to becoming one of the biggest funk artists of all time. But Rick didn't stop there. In early 1979, he dropped his second album, Busting Out of L7. Like the first one, it was a big success. It made it to the top 20 on the Billboard 200 and hit #2 on the R&B album charts. Later that year, he released his third album, Fire It Up. At the same time, Rick went on his first big tour, the Fire Up Tour. He even invited rising stars like Prince and Tina Marie to perform as his opening acts. In 1980, Rick tried something different with his album Garden of Love. This one was more focused on love songs, but it didn't do as well. It only reached number 83 on the Billboard 200. But Rick didn't let that slow him down. In 1981, Rick released his biggest album ever, Street Songs. This album mixed different styles like rock, funk, and new wave. It included hits like Ghetto Life, Fire and Desire, and the iconic Super Freak. The album was a massive success, selling over 4 million copies worldwide. Super Freak became one of his most famous songs, peaking at number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100. Following Street Songs, Rick released more gold-certified albums, including Thrown Down in 1982 and Cold Blooded in 1983. During this time, Rick also helped other artists become successful. He created groups like the Mary Jane Girls, who had hits like All Night Long and In My House. He also worked with legends like The Temptations, Smokey Robinson, and even Eddie Murphy. Rick James wasn't just about music. He appeared on TV, including an episode of The A-Team, and continued making music throughout the 1980s. His 1988 album, Wonderful, included the hit song Lucy's Rap. In any case, Rick James died on August 6, 2004 at just 56 years old. His body gave out from years of hard living, but his legend was just getting started. The man who went AWOL from the Navy, survived the Manson murders, and built a funk empire that saved Motown had finally met his match. Not from industry politics or powerful executives, but from the demons he'd been running from his whole life. But here's what makes Rick's story so powerful. He never apologized for who he was. In a business that demanded black artists stay in their lane, smile on cue, and never challenge the system, Rick James said, "Fuck that," at every turn. He was too wild for Soul Train, too honest for Hollywood, and too real for an industry built on fake smiles and manufactured personas. Don Cornelius thought he could embarrass Rick on television and put him in his place. Instead, he created a legend, Every time someone told Rick he was nothing, he came back harder, funkier, and more unapologetically himself. The beef with Dawn wasn't really about two egos clashing. It was about what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Rick represented everything the old guard feared. A black artist who owned his sexuality, controlled his image, and refused to bow down to anybody. Today, Super Freak still gets crowds moving. His influence echoes through hip-hop, and new generations discover the king of punk funk through viral memes and legendary stories. Rick James won the only war that mattered, the fight for artistic freedom. He lived fast, burned bright, and left a legacy that no industry politics could ever touch. That's the most gangster move of all. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.